welcome to another Fastened Like Nails podcast. I'm here in the studio with Noah Sanders. Noah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And those of you that don't know Noah, he wrote the book Born Again Dirt, which I read, I think, close to 15 years ago. Does that sound right?
It came out in 2012, so probably not quite that long ago.
2012, 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Life seems to be going by faster for me than most people these days. But the book, I don't even know who sent it to me, Noah. I think I picked it up at a homeschool conference, and I just kind of liked the title, Born Again Dirt, and I brought it home, and it was like, it was right during the time when I was experimenting with, with gardening. I've always had a green thumb, but I never knew what I was doing and why I was doing it, but I always plowed the ground up, and I couldn't keep the weeds out no matter what. It seemed like, where do these weeds come from? So those of you that are unfamiliar with Noah Sanders, not only did he write the book Born Again Dirt, but he has a farm down in Alabama, and I visited it myself, and it was a marvel to watch what you were doing. And yesterday in his class here at our Masters Guild, I heard some things taught yesterday. In fact, I called my wife right after the class and I said, Debbie, I wish you were here. You should have heard the things that were taught. And so I want to just kind of review some of the things from yesterday. And so the thing that I think meant the most to me was the charts. Well, one of the things was the 4% grade, and then when it had a 2.5 minute rain, it washed how much? What's the percentage of the soil was gone after that rain in just a couple minutes? Well,
yes.
you could back up. Tell us a little bit more of the story.
Yeah, so one of the things we're talking about this week is, as Christians, how do we approach agriculture, just like how do we approach anything in life? And how do we let God speak into that? And how do we look to Him as the master farmer and learn from Him? Because we face challenges with, many things in life, and because of sin and, our broken relationship with God. And agriculture is one of those areas, our relationship with His creation. So when we face challenges, we have choices. Do we go to man and our own wisdom, or do we go to God and say, what wisdom can we learn from Him? So what we've been trying to do this week is do kind of like reflect the heart that Jesus had when He was here. He said, I only do what I see my Father doing. So we went into the woods and we try to look at how does God, do things in natural creation, and then just with childlike faith try to apply that in the way that we're growing a garden. So the two principles that we noticed in creation was that God doesn't have regular inversion, pulverization of the soil over the entire area, every single season, like we do with a lot of our gardening methods where we're tilling it up and we're plowing it up, 6 to 8 inches deep every single season. And there's also always a mulch cover on the ground. So yesterday, with the experiment you were talking about, we were trying to contrast basically the way that man does it a lot of times, where we plow it and we don't have any mulch on the ground, or God's blanket as we call it, and then contrasting that with ground that's not plowed that has a mulch on it. So there was an experiment done with identical plots where they were at the a 4% slope, like you said, and the only difference were those two things. One was plowed and not mulched. Plowed and not mulched, and the other one was unplowed and mulched. And there was a simulated 2.5-inch rain applied to those plots in 30 minutes, which is a really massive, quite a downpour. And so the difference we saw was that on the plot that was, done with the regular methods of tilling
Plowing
it up and no mulch, do you remember how much water ran off?
I think it was 90%.
Yes, 90% of the water of that 2.5 inches that hit ran off the plot completely, and only 10% infiltrated down into the ground for the plants to use. And it also took like over 11 tons of soil per acre.
Unreal. Erosion
in just 30
gone.
minutes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just boom, all washed away.
That's
Contrast
crazy.
that with the other plot that was following those two principles that we saw in God's creation. How much do you remember ran off?
I think it was 4%?
Only 6% ran off, and 94% infiltrated.
Stayed.
So more than the inverse, and only just a few hundred pounds of topsoil
that's amazing.
Ran off.
And okay, so that was amazing in and of itself. And then you talked about, the commercial industrial farms, they're using all these chemicals. And it seems like they keep using more death. They're trying to kill bacteria, kill the different weeds, kill, these Roundup, and they're always killing. I remember one of the boys at the end of the session yesterday goes, yeah, the difference is that they use death in their farming And then God uses life. Explain the principle of life and death in a farming, right, that we use today.
Yeah, well, we want a lot of, like you said, the commercial farming, the tools in our toolkit today. If we're having a problem with a disease, or we're having problems with weeds, or we're having problems with, a lot of these different things that bother our crops, we tend to say, okay, well, the solution is to find something to kill the life that we don't want there, kill the disease, kill the bug, kill the unnecessary weeds. And instead of, I think the more proper question to ask is, what is it sometimes about our management that's causing this issue in the first place? Because when you go into creation, you don't see just left and right, like all these disease, sick plants and all these, things. There's a lot of health in all that you see. So a lot of times when you really look at God's creation versus the plots that we're preparing, or the gardens and places that we have, there's a lack of diversity of life that causes the ability for basically bad guys to come in and attack our plants. And I kind of tell some of my students sometimes, I say, we think that, the bad bugs or the bad, germs or pathogens, if we just eliminate that, then, if we eliminate everything, then we'll, the sterile environment is the safest environment for our plants. But if you were in New York City, would you feel safer walking down a deserted alley or a crowded street?
Yeah, crowded street.
Well, there might be bad people in that crowded street, right?
Hopefully there's good people too, though.
But exactly. It's if you have enough good people there, then, and so that's kind of the approach is, if there's something bad there, then there's an imbalance where there's not enough, life there to help balance out and keep it healthy. And so that's the beauty, I think, of when we're applying compost, or we're trying to basically promote some of these natural systems that are naturally in place, whether we're growing crops or we have animals, is the solutions tend to be life-based. We add more life versus we kill everything there. And to me, I'm always trying to think, does this method reflect the heart of God or not? And to me, promoting life seems to be much more consistent with God's way of doing things than just being an expert in death, right?
It's amazing. I mean, it's the same principle with the Word of God. The more you have the Word of God in your life, you're still going to be dealing with sin in your life.
Right.
But the more you have the good in your life, the more light and
smothering
salt.
out the other, right?
Yeah, it's really... I had the opportunity, I don't even know if I call it an opportunity, but I was down in one of the largest, in fact, I was in the largest manufacturer of poison control of weeds in agriculture. I'm not going to name the name of the company, because if I named it, I'm probably going to get sued. So I had an opportunity. I was speaking in the area, and a homeschool dad was one of the scientists in this very large chemical company. And like I said, they're the largest in the world. And they can't be sued, by the way. Under President Bush's administration, he made them exempt from any lawsuit of any harm that they could do to people in the poisons that they use in our ground. So that kind of like bothered me. Like, how could they be exempt from any lawsuits? That's crazy, especially with Roundup and all this other stuff. So I had the opportunity to be there. And while I was there, this born-again Christian dad, who was a scientist there, I asked him, I said, do you have like a guilty conscience working here? I said, because you're manufacturing poisons that are actually hurting people, actually causing health problems. And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, no, I don't have any guilty conscience over it. In fact, just the opposite. He goes, we're trying to bring food to the world. We're trying to feed the world population. And even though our processes and our poisons are hurting people, and life expectancy may go down just a little bit, he goes, in people's health may be a little bit worse from their 60s until their 80s. He said, more people are going to eat and not starve to death. He says, we believe that is better than people dying of starvation, even though people are going to have less healthy lives. And I'm going like, that sounds to me like you're playing God, I said, God is the God of the one that brings food to the world. And I said, yeah, we need to do our part, but to really make choices that you're going to have people be less healthy seems to be like you're playing God. And so your class yesterday, when I saw the principles of life and death in agriculture, just astounded me. And then you said something that I thought was really cool. You were talking with the students about compost, and you sent me up to go get some I got sheep manure and horse manure, and I got all this stuff. And then you said something in the class. You said you can't put enough compost to hurt it. You can't put enough life into this to hurt this. And then it's just like, wow, that is an amazing principle, because there's so much more about life itself.
Right.
So explain a little bit about composting and what that has to do with a successful garden.
Yes. So we talked about yesterday a simplified version of thinking about what does soil made of, healthy soil, what is it comprised of? And the way that we remembered is we said it's
static?
Okay. No, those are different types of composting.
Okay.
But we're talking about soil. What's in soil? First of all, you have dead things that used to be alive.
Yep.
That's your organic matter. It's all your leaves and sticks and bugs and everything that have broken down. And then you have dead things that were never alive, which is your minerals. It's your sand or your clay or whatever. And then you have living things that are still alive. Those are all your microorganisms, and they're breaking down the minerals and the organic matter, and they actually make that nutrients available to the plants. It's like God's fertilizer factory.
Worms a part of that?
Worms are a part of it, yeah.
Now, when you said that about the worms, you have this slimy thing on it, and that keeps their burrows, the structure.
All these microbes are gluing together all the soils,
Amazing.
and they're opening it up, and they're bringing the organic matter down into the soil where it's more available to the plants.
Amazing.
They're actually bringing up minerals from lower down. It's amazing how that works. But the neat thing is all we have to do is just mimic those principles of not disturbing that too much and keeping that nice organic matter on top. And then it automatically does it itself. You don't have to know how all it works. But compost is a way to help heal your soil and put that fertilizer factory back in there in a way that regenerates it more quickly. So poor soils typically just have your minerals. They just have the dead things that were never alive, right? The rocks or the sand, like that's all that's there.
Clay.
So you're missing the organic matter, all that rotten dead stuff, and the living things. And so compost are those two ingredients that you build a pile where you're basically culturing a bunch of the microbes with the food source of organic matter, and then you take that and you put it back onto your garden itself, so that it adds those two missing ingredients. And the beauty of it is it's really hard for you to put too much on there, because it's not a straight fertilizer. It's not a straight nutrient that you're going to imbalance. It's already a balanced system that's creating the food as the plants need it. It's amazing.
You brought us up into the woods, and I was amazed. Just from observation, there were no weeds in the woods. There's this blanket of leaves, okay? And then you had to get down and pull the leaves aside, and then to look really closely. Now, when I first looked, I didn't see anything, okay? Just like, okay, there's dirt there. And then I pulled a little bit of the soil aside, and there's about a quarter of an inch, half an inch.
Yeah, it's not very deep before you get to the clay.
Yeah, and it was beautiful. It was rich, black topsoil from the decaying of the leaves over centuries. But then as I started, I kind of like shut all you guys out, all the students out, and I just started looking. And all of a sudden I started seeing like the dirt moving around. And I'm like, what in the world is going on there? And there must have been at least a dozen different types of bugs.
Yes.
Spiders, worms, you name
Little
it.
Centipedes.
Yeah, they were all there. And it just took me to just observe it. And I was thinking, like, this is alive. This is God's garden in the woods.
It is.
I'm thinking, like, wow, we need to replicate that in our own gardens, because that's, and not only was it alive, there were no weeds and things were growing there. So every time I went to plant, I would always dig the hole, 4 inches at least, minimal 4 inches. And I put my seed way down 4 inches, right? Where none of that living stuff is there, and things never really grew that well because I'm like down in the clay and everything. But I think I got you on this. You ready? I'm going to give you this is going to stump you a little bit. Okay. Okay. So you don't like the idea of tilling up the soil 6 to 8 inches and turning it over, because you taught us yesterday that, what happens at, that top surface, it's like, heating up a clay pot, where the clay gets hard in the sun and then the rain comes and it doesn't stay there. It's not doing any good for anything. And also you talked about when we till the soil and bring it up 6 to 8 inches and turn it over, we're actually taking those weed seeds that have been down there for however long, that have been dormant. Now they're up on top and now they're growing again, which explains why my gardens are always full of weeds. But Noah, I've got you on this one. The one thing I know is the Bible really well as far as gardening concerns. And in the Old Testament, it talks about breaking up the fallow ground. It talks about, it talks about plowing.
It does.
So the Bible says we should plow, so I don't think I could follow your ways unless you could prove to me right now why we shouldn't plow.
Yep, that's a good question, and it is something to think about, but it's one of those things that we want to recognize the difference between the plowing nowadays and the plowing that they did back then. And I'm not an expert at it, so somebody could correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're right.
Okay. But the plowing methods that we use today, especially, you're either using a tiller, which is a mechanical pulverization of the soil, which, you wouldn't have had back then as much. Or
started around the late 1800s, right?
Well, the John Deere moldboard plow was an invention that was really mass-produced in the late 1800s that allowed you to really, them to break up the prairies, to go down deep, to flip that sod over on its head, and then especially with larger machinery and stuff, allowing them to be able to pull larger and larger plows, they allowed to do that. Well, back in times past, before they had all that bigger equipment, a plow is more almost like a spear tip kind of point on the end.
I have one.
Oh, you do? Really?
Yeah.
And so what it does is it opens up the ground and breaks up the ground shallowly without flipping it on its head.
Yeah.
So it's not disturbing all the microbes down there, and it gives you a nice seed bed and all.
Yeah.
But it's a very different type of plowing than we see nowadays, and it was more consistent with what we see with the kind of disturbances that are in, because there are disturbances in the soil. Of the soil and natural creation, and that's how God's fertilizer or planting system is. A bird scratches away the leaves a little bit, when it's looking for some bugs, and it scratches in a few seeds, and boop, they seed to soil contact, and man, they start growing.
Yeah.
Or the antelope's hooves, or the deer's hooves, or the something rooted around in the woods. That's how it works, and so that's not inconsistent with what we see in creation.
Sense.
And when you use that spear tip plow, you're doing the same exact thing, but that's very different than taking 8 inches of your soil and flipping on its head every single season.
So up in my property, it's really different. It's very diverse. I have one section that's all sand. I have another section that's all beautiful loam. I mean, literally, it's about a foot of loam. Okay, I don't know how it got there, but when I dug it up one time, I got it all the way to my elbow.
Wow.
With just this black loam. And the other sections are just solid clay everywhere. And there's a little bit of mix of sand and clay together. But in the woods where we were, there's that half-inch layer of topsoil. And so every time I would go into this one section where I wanted to farm, I would till it up a good 8 to 10 inches, get it really deep, and what I was doing is I was taking the hard clay that was underneath it and putting the clay on top and putting all my nice, topsoil at the very bottom. And I'm like, why didn't I see that before? And so now I'm really looking at farming completely differently. And you taught us yesterday of farming by building up rather than moving it downward.
Exactly. Well, if you look at the way that God builds soil and creation, it's always on top. You're always adding it on top. And it's the microbes and bugs that will bring it down into the soil at the proper rate. But healthy soil, like when you dig and you take a section of the soil, right, and you take a core sample, or it's layers, right? So it's richer in organic matter up the top, moving down more towards a higher concentration of minerals down low, and that's how it's designed to function. All the microbes, they function. Certain ones function at the top that are aerobic, so they breathe oxygen, and then there's ones deeper down that function and they don't breathe oxygen. So it's not this homogeneous mixture.
Yeah.
It's this beautiful system of layers that we destroy when we mix that up. And what's neat is you really don't need this beautiful topsoil 6 inches deep. I have some gardens that it's really hard red clay, and when I put compost on the top and put some mulch on, that actual layer of enriched soil is only an inch deep before you get down to the red clay.
Really?
And you would not believe the crops that grow in it.
Wow.
It's absolutely beautiful. You don't have to mix it all down in there.
That's
because
amazing.
they just need it right there on the top.
This is so good for me because I bring truckloads of topsoil. Got to have it a foot deep. Oh, that's really good to know. So as we sum this up, if you could just share with the audience, some of the spiritual applications that have been most important to you that God has taught you over the years. Now, we've talked about this in the past, and I'll just mention it. Your 4 main principles of doing things on time, with minimal waste, high degree of excellence, and always with joy. That has stuck with me. From the day I heard it with you, that is one of my philosophy, my worldviews of life, especially the barometer of joy. If you're not enjoying things, then something's wrong. Something's wrong between my spirit and God's spirit. Something's not lining up. But one of the things that you've taught me, and I'm going to let you finish with what God has taught you, is that I have a tendency to try to do too much or to plant in too wide of an area. I got blueberry bushes up, about a quarter mile from here. I've got a small vineyard. I've got a small orchard, and all of those things do not grow very well. The deer kill my orchard, pretty much take out 50% of it every year, and I'm always putting new trees in. My blueberries, by the time I get up there, the birds eat most of my blueberries, so I'm not up there to enjoy my harvest, and then my vineyard, I don't know who's killing those things. I'm planting new grape, root system every year. I just can't keep up with it. So I've got that growing up there, and you would think after 25 years I would do something different. I keep doing the same thing, keep replanting stuff, and it's not working for me. And then down here at the church, my first inclination was, let's plant this whole thing. And then you came on and said something very significant to me. You said, you have to start smaller and grow out of it, because God will not allow you to be faithful in much until you're faithful in that which is least. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, an overarching principle that a lot of this ties to, that I'm trying to take to heart, and that I feel like is a really, really important base for all of this, because we ultimately want to found everything on the Lord Jesus Christ, and it's on his heart. And one of the heart principles that he displayed when he came was that of humility, humbling himself. And so one of the things I've told people before is, in order to become the greatest farmer requires the greatest humility. And this week we've talked about a lot of really amazing methods that have come from farmers who got to the lowest point, that they were willing then to say, okay, God, I'm open to learning something new. And the same thing applies when we're wanting to start with something that we haven't done yet before. We have to start and be willing to start at the bottom and work our way up, be faithful with little before we attempt to do more. We even talked about that yesterday. Like, there's, things just like skills. Like, you can't just expect to have somebody pay you to play the violin for a living next week when you just started learning this week, right? Because you've got to work your way up and eventually, do more. But the principle of the parable of the talents is that if you're faithful with little, God will be the one that adds to you. But if you're unfaithful with what you have, he'll take away from you. So it's not how much you do that gives you an increase. It's how well you do with what you've been given that then God brings the increase to. And when we're looking at our gardening, or if we're looking at anything in our life, what we're going to get a well done, good and faithful servant for is that increase, not just maintaining what we have, right? And not just how much we have, but how much we've increased what we did have. And so that's where, with gardening especially, we have such a tendency to think more is more, right? Bigger is better.
Right, yeah.
And it's not. It's how well you do. And some of the best farmers in the country right now are those who do the most with the least amount of land.
That's awesome. In Luke chapter 16, I was reading this last night. It says, he that is faithful in that which is least will be faithful in that which is much, but he that is unfaithful in that which is least will be also unfaithful in that which is much. And then he says this, he says, if you're not faithful with another man's resources, how can I entrust unto you that which is yours?
Right.
And as soon as I read it, I realized, wow, God has something for each of us, but he cannot entrust us with what he has planned for us until we have been faithful with other men's resources. So young people that are growing up and working for somebody, they have to do their due diligence. They have to be diligent in working for another man and in having a return on the other man's investment in them. I'll never forget this. God has taught me some amazing lessons. I'll give you two illustrations, one a negative about me and one a positive. The negative is I was working for a very wealthy lady. I think she was a billionaire, and I was her caretaker. And I was going to seminary, taking 21 credit hours, raising 3 children, married, and, we're living on a farm. I had 70 sheep, 22 horses, and completely overextended, okay? I was overwhelmed with life, and I was not feeling the greatest either. I had ulcerative bleeding colitis, I had chronic fatigue, I had depression, I had, you name it, I had it, okay? And that's because I was overextended. Trying to do too much, thinking I was doing this for my kids when I was I don't know why I was doing it, to be honest with you. So this very wealthy lady, she wants me to start a fish hatchery, and she's got this one reservoir that is perfect, 50 feet long, 60 feet long by 20 feet wide, 10 feet deep. And it is perfect for a fish hatchery. She wanted me to do, I think it was trout at the time. And I'm going to seminary. I'm trying to raise my family. I'm not feeling the greatest. And I'm tell her, no, I am not doing this. No way. And she was really adamant about it. You will do this. And there was this locking of horns, and I was I set my feet in the ground. I'm I am not doing this because I felt she was taking advantage of me. But I also wasn't praying about it either. I never, Lord, would you like me to stop, taking 21 credit hours? Maybe I'll take 5 credit hours and actually concentrate on this. So I stubbornly didn't do it. And she got someone else to do it, and I was fine with it. 20 years later, I'm here in Mount Morris, Western New York, and I'm building these ponds, and I'm filling them with fish. And now I need to learn everything that I can about fish. And as soon as I started doing it, I'm thinking I could have had all of this knowledge God wanted to give me at her expense. She was going to pay for my education. She was going to pay for all of the equipment. I would have known all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And because I didn't seize the opportunity that God was giving me, I today am learning the hard way. That the positive one about being faithful in that which is least is that, Lamplighter Ministries has really grown. It's global today. It's, we have a publishing company. We have Lamplighter Theaters in 34 countries, listen to 1 million listeners on a weekly basis. God is just really blessed. We have the collegiate program, the Masters Guild, Summer Guild. So there's a lot going on here. But when none of this existed and we were just printing a few books at a time, I was traveling 40 weeks a year minimally. And Debbie, my wife, would travel with me, and then my kids. And I remember, going from conference to conference. I remember waking up in hotel rooms not knowing what state I was in, and we just keep traveling, and not once in those 25 years did I ever feel ungrateful or that this was too hard. I just really felt like, God, this is the little that you've given me. This is what you called me to. And I'm going to just keep sowing seeds and telling people this is the best book you'll ever read in your life. And I meant it. And as the ministry just grew, it grew without me even realizing it. Like a beautiful garden, you be faithful in that which is least. And I just encourage people, be faithful in that which is least. And then God might be able to give you that which is your own, and I believe that's the reason Lamplighter Ministries exists today, was because all the people that were involved in the beginning were faithful in the little things. And even to this day, I have this one lady named Kathy in St. Louis. She's been working with me for about 20 years. She just loved to be at conferences. She loved to share the books. A lady named B down in New Mexico, she just loves doing it. They've always been faithful in that which is least. Mary in Michigan, Beth in California. All of these ladies love the stories. Jennifer in California, you ask them, hey, we got a conference, can you drive 10 hours? They'll do it in a heartbeat. They're faithful in that which is least, and you should see the blessing that God has upon their lives and how God uses them in the ministry here at Lamplighter. So that's my story of what God has done to bless us and to use the principles that you've taught this week. I think that's one of the most powerful ones to me, being faithful in that which is least, using smaller spaces and really use those spaces to really be able to move outward because you've used every square inch of the space that God's giving you. So as we close here, Noah, if you could teach one of the most important principles that you think God has taught you, and you could tell other people what that is, what would be the most important thing you would teach us?
I think one of the things I want our students to go away with this week is the idea that of the skill of listening to the Lord and following in obedience. Farming and gardening is a great thing, and there's a lot of great things in life, but we really experience fruit when we're connected, to the vine of Christ. And even good things can be a bad thing if it's distracting you from what God has called you to do. So
That's
if
good.
God hasn't called you to like garden or start a farm or something like that, then don't do it, because you need to be focusing on what He has told you to do. And when you're listening to the Lord, it's important to, like we've just been talking about, be faithful with what you are currently hearing. You know, whatever He's teaching, whatever He's telling you right now, whatever He's clearly told you, if it's just what's in His Word, are you obeying that? Are you doing something with what He's currently telling you? And then He will entrust more revelation to you once you do something with what you've heard now. And a lot of us young people, we are like, okay, what's going to come next, and what's my mission in life, and all these questions of God, can you show me what's coming?
Yeah.
And for me, even, I don't know what's, I have. I'm trying to clearly be faithful to each thing God's given me each year, and I'm passionate about what He's given me right now. But He may tell me to do something completely different tomorrow. And
Like working here at Lamplighter?
well, that's the exciting adventure of saying, Jesus is the one who's the hero, and we're tagging along, following, and joining Him on His adventure. And it's not about me stressing out with, is God going to support me on my adventure? And when you do that, there's just such freedom in it, and there's such a joy and an ability to just be wholehearted in whatever we're doing at the moment, because we trust Him to show us the next steps.
Last year you called me, and I called you, and you were having a pretty rough day. You had just had, a lot of your crops had just grown to where you're getting ready to harvest, and then you had this devastating hailstorm. How big was the hail, and what did it do to your farm? And if you remember, share what your response was. That I still remember it to this day.
Well, it's an interesting story because it had been right after the beginning of COVID, and we had I had a burden on my heart for how do we use what God's taught us to share with other people. It had been after I'd heard about the idea that there's about 140-something million people on the verge of starvation around the world prior to COVID, and with all the shutdowns, that was expected to double. And you think about, what impact can I even make on that? I mean, it's so overwhelming, And God kind of gave us a vision for, my kingdom is not like these big companies, that try to have a solution to save the world from the top down. That's not the way God works. He works from the bottom up. It's an upside down kingdom. And He's like, imagine if each person that grew a garden to the glory of God just taught 2 other people each year. And everybody used their garden to just equip a few other people. If you just had 2 people that taught, and everybody just shared and helped 2 other people start a garden each year, then if I did that and it started just with me, in 10 years there'd be 1 million little gardens, and in 14 years there'd be 1 billion. So that power of multiplication. So, but we had in our heart, we needed to take some time to develop some resources that could help people to do that, and we felt like God wanted us to work on that last spring, but we're like, how are we going to have time? How are we going to do this? So finally, we just felt like we just need to be commit to okay, God, tell us what to do and make this, show us how to do it. So I remember my wife and I got down on the living room on our knees one Saturday evening, and we're just like, okay, God, just if this is not what you want us to do, then we don't want to do it. Just give us the right heart and the right time and show us how to do this. Well, the next morning we wake up and I look outside and this storm is rolling in, and I'm like, wow, it's like really windy and rainy. And the next thing you know, whoa, there's this loud noise, and the whole ground outside turns white with hail.
Whoa.
And it wasn't super big hail, but it was a lot of hail. Like it was piled up kind of hail. So we had one of the prettiest gardens. It was one of those seasons, in April. The crops were just looking beautiful. All these little lettuce plants out there, all beautiful, and these gorgeous onions and all. And I remember going up there and looking, and it looked like somebody had taken a lawnmower over everything, and just trampled and just smushed it down to the ground.
Of all the days for me to call you.
And, God I felt like He was saying, look, is this all about your pretty garden? Or is it, all about you being available for what I have for you? And so, when you think about it, it's all God's, then instead of going up and being like, God, why did you do this to my lettuce? Then you can be like, wow, God, you really destroyed your lettuce here. I wonder what you're going to do about it, What do I need to do next? So
that's an amazing way to look at it. Really, how many people look at devastation like that? God, look what you did to your crops. That is amazing.
But, they're His. He can do that if He wants. And I'm His caretaker, so I'm like, all right, what's next on the list?
Wow. Oh, wait. You got to stop for a second. Folks, do you hear what's being said here? Not just a garden with hail coming on it, but whatever God brings into our lives. Wow, that's just an amazing insight. Thank you for that.
So we felt like the Lord was telling us, well, now you don't have to make a farm delivery this week. So why don't you work on this book this handbook that I was telling you.
Seriously?
So that's what I worked on the whole week. Was
The one that we did this week?
Yeah, the Well Water
kidding
Garden
me?
handbook that we did. That would just be a resource for people that it's just kind of like, not everybody's called to be a chef, but some of us want to cook a good lasagna, so we find a good recipe. So we love gardening, so we were just trying to create a little recipe for people that want to grow some of their own food and use it to teach other people about Jesus and teach people how to grow their own food. So it's amazing how not only were we able to get that resource, a rough draft of that done that week to get started, but those crops grew back. Almost all of them,
Neat.
the romaine heads from the base, and so many,
praise the Lord.
not all of them, but it was amazing how many came back just beautiful. And then we even had some extended family that all chipped together and sent us a little bit of money, and it covered that delivery. And so at the end of the day, it was like we really hadn't lost anything, and yet God had built our faith and allowed us to produce this resource, and it was just
Praise God.
such a faith building experience. And that's what you think. Often God grows us primarily through suffering.
Yeah.
And so that's why the response that Christ calls us to and that the Apostle Paul calls us to is, when you encounter all these really tough things, rejoice. When you get persecuted and people say awful things about you, celebrate. And you're like, that is that, ludicrous? Well, it isn't. It's not like you're just denying reality. When you are having an eternal perspective and you realize what you're gaining eternally through that, it should make you rejoice. Right?
Awesome.
It's by having that eternal perspective that you're like, there really is reason for rejoice. I'm not just denying
Praise God.
reality. So it's encouraging.
Is this resource available yet? The one you did yesterday for publication? Has it been published yet?
So it's the current draft. I'm working on another edition, but the current one is available at wellwatergardenproject.org. It's a free PDF download. We hope to have like a hard copy available for people to purchase at some point. But we want it to be a free resource for ministries or families or whoever to be able to use. Our goal is, again, to see 1 million well water gardens planted around the U.S. as a visible light in communities that people can see the heart of Jesus through a little garden, and that people can be equipped to grow their own food. So,
would you prayerfully consider allowing Lamplighter to publish that resource? You prayerfully consider that?
yeah, we'll pray about it.
We'll do it in hardcover and softcover. Do both. We'll talk about your book, Born Again Dirt. Getting that out and getting it's a must read. It's and the exercises of your curriculum this week have been just incredible. This news has to get out. I was so excited about what you taught yesterday. Literally, I immediately called my wife and I said, because we've studied all this stuff. We've seen the Garden of Eden project on video. I spent a lot of time studying under Hans. What's his name? Hans. He's up in Switzerland. Not Zeffler. Something like Zeffler. He's the one that's got the permaculture up there, and he grows lemon and lime trees 6,000 feet above sea level, in the snow, and he uses all the rock and stone and trees, in the water. He's got like 30 or 40 ponds up there.
Yeah,
they just run down into it. Yeah, it really is, and how he absorbs the heat from the sun. So we've studied all of that, but I've not heard anything like I heard this week. Okay, this is putting God's perspective, not just in gardening, but how to grow us spiritually as well. The lessons are like hand in hand with gardening in our spiritual life. They're all there. And so thank you so much for what you've shared this week. And folks, again, that's
wellwatergardenproject.org.
Okay,
Project.org.
I think this is soon going to become in a hardcover edition and softcover edition. So just listen up with our email advertisements. Go to lamplighter.net. If you're not signed up for our weekly emails, you might want to do that. We got some cool things that are coming on. Not just talking about our books, which, by the way, we just published our newest book. It's called Palace of Deceit. It is not only the book of the year, it may be the best book we've ever published. Now, I say that probably once a year, but I really believe this one. This one is just, it influenced my life significantly. So that one just came out, and then the audio drama, The Hidden Hand, is coming out next week. It is phenomenal. It's 14 episodes. It's dealing with God bringing 7 people to the end of themselves, actually 10 people to the end of themselves, so to learn to trust in the hidden hand of God. It's powerful. If there's some people that have struggled with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, that we were able to craft the biblical worldview of that issue in this drama. It's significant. So a lot of good stuff that's coming our way. And then we just published another drama called Dashed to Pieces. I've listened to it half a dozen times. I've cried each time. The power of the gospel. The Apostle Paul shows up, not literally, but he shows up in this drama, and the way he shares the gospel of Romans chapter 10 is so clear, so touching, and so moving that people just have to listen to it. So Noah Sanders, thank you so much for being with us. Again, this is another Fastened Like Nails podcast. If you don't have our catalog of our rare collector books from the 16, 17, 1800s, you can go to lamplighter.net, or you can call us toll-free, 1-888, the letter A, Gospel. That's 1-888, the letter A, Gospel. God bless you all, and we'll look forward to serving you once again on another Fasten Like Nails podcast. God bless.
Look at all the treasure this thief has gathered.
Everyone has moments of fear.
Get away! I will burn you.
Everyone up! Now, we must seek higher ground.
This is the story of one family
My name is Virgilius.
I owe you my life.
who risks all to follow Jesus.
But you would do well in the house of a Roman to keep such wild thoughts to yourself.
See their faith put to the test.
What is that noise?
There is nothing to fear, little one. The Lord has kept us safe this far.
Father, please don't make me go in there.
Face your fear with faith on a perilous journey through ancient Rome in Lamplighter Theater's newest audio drama, Dashed to Pieces. Order your copy today at lamplighter.net or call 1-888-A-GOSPEL. That's 1-888, the letter A, Gospel.
Looking for an opportunity to experience God in ways beyond your imagination? This summer, put faith into action as you work side by side with master teachers to recapture the arts and redefine creative excellence. Presenting the Lamplighter Guild, a week of mentoring and apprenticeship in creative writing, story creation, stage and voice acting, sound design, music composition, music design, photography, filmmaking, culinary, horticulture, and biblical theology. Explore your passion and unlock your full potential through God's unfolding plan. Register today and learn what it means to know God intimately, proclaim Him passionately, and enjoy Him infinitely at the Lamplighter Summer Guild. Go to lamplighterguild.com or call 1-888, the letter A, Gospel. That's lamplighterguild.com or 1-888, the letter A, Gospel.